On the morning of Saturday, the 10th of November, 1973, at approximately 9:15 a.m. local time, in the mailroom of the Rome offices of the daily newspaper Il Messaggero on the Via del Tritone in central Rome, a 43-year-old assistant editor named Vincenzo Tessandori opened a small white postal package that had arrived in the morning mail delivery from Naples. The package, by the postal markings preserved in the criminal evidence file of the subsequent Italian prosecution, had been mailed from a postal substation in the Calabrian provincial capital of Reggio Calabria approximately 72 hours earlier. It had been delayed in transit by an Italian postal workers' partial strike that had affected southern route mail deliveries between November 7 and the 9th of November 1973. Inside the package, wrapped in a single sheet of brown paper, was a human ear. The ear, by the forensic examination conducted by the Rome Carabinieri laboratory on the afternoon of the 10th of November 1973, was the right outer ear of a 16-year-old male, severed below the temporal attachment by what the laboratory identified as a single-edged household razor blade. Accompanying the ear in the package was a lock of curly auburn hair, approximately 4 inches in length, and a typewritten ransom note in Italian. The note, in its operative paragraph, identified the ear as the right ear of John Paul Getty III. It informed the recipients that the next package would contain a different anatomical specimen if the ransom previously demanded was not paid in full within 10 days. How does the eldest grandson of the wealthiest private individual on the planet, the grandson of a man whose personal fortune in the autumn of 1973 was estimated by Fortune magazine at approximately $2 billion in 1973 currency, the equivalent of approximately $14 billion in 2026, spend 123 days as the captive of a southern Italian organized crime cell? While his grandfather, the man with the operational capacity to authorize the ransom payment with a single telephone call, declines to authorize the payment. The grandson was John Paul Getty III. He was 16 years old. He had been a resident of Rome with his mother Gail Harris Getty and his 3 younger siblings since 1971. He had been abducted from the Piazza Farnese in central Rome at approximately 3 a.m. on the morning of Tuesday, the 10th of July, 1973, by the November 10 arrival of the package, 123 days earlier. The grandfather was Jean Paul Getty Sr., age 80, the founder of Getty Oil, the operational architect of the 1949 Saudi-Kuwaiti neutral zone oil concession, the resident in permanent occupancy of the 72-room Sutton Place estate in Surrey, England, and the man whose 1957 Fortune magazine designation as the richest American had in the 16 years since never been operationally challenged. In the next 40 minutes, you will encounter 3 things the Getty family has spent 53 years arranging the public record around. The exact financial mechanism by which J. Paul Getty Sr.'s eventual ransom payment was structured not as a payment to save his grandson's life, but as a tax-deductible loss against his oil revenues, with a portion loaned to his own son at 4% interest. The exact words J. Paul Getty Sr. spoke to the assembled American press on the steps of Sutton Place on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 11th of July 1973, the day after the kidnapping, when asked whether he would pay the ransom, and the exact provision in his last will and testament, executed in 1958 and amended through 14 separate codicils between 1958 and his death on the 6th of June, 1976, by which his eldest grandson, the boy whose right ear was, on the morning of the 10th of November, 1973, lying on a forensic examination table in a Carabinieri laboratory in Rome, was, by the operative paragraph, allocated $0. This is not a story about a fortune that collapsed. The Getty Trust in 2026 holds approximately $10.5 billion in endowment assets. This is a story about what a fortune of this scale is operationally willing not to spend. Hold one image in your mind. A small white postal package on the Via del Tritone in central Rome, on the morning of Saturday, the 10th of November, 1973. A delayed mail delivery from a Calabrian postal substation. A single sheet of brown paper wrapped around a human ear. Remember the package. We will return to it. In the spring of 1903, a 48-year-old Minneapolis attorney named George Franklin Getty, the son of a Methodist circuit preacher from Grantsville, Maryland, the holder of a 1,882 law degree from the University of Michigan, the principal of a small Minneapolis insurance defense practice that had, by the year 1902, generated approximately $12,000 in annual gross billings, boarded a Northern Pacific Railway sleeper car at the St. Paul Union Depot bound for the Indian Territory station at Bartlesville, in what would in 1907 become the northeastern corner of the state of Oklahoma. He was traveling, by the documentary record preserved in the J. Paul Getty papers at the Getty Research Institute, on a 10-day commercial assignment for a Minneapolis real estate syndicate that had retained him to inspect a parcel of producing oil lease properties in the Bartlesville Dewey Field, a small but commercially active oil region that had been opened to non-tribal commercial leasing in 1897 under the Curtis Act provisions, allotting Cherokee and Osage Nation tribal lands to individual allottees with the right to grant subsurface mineral leases. Getty arrived at Bartlesville on the morning of the 20th of April, 1903. He spent the next 10 days inspecting approximately 14 producing well leases across the Dewey-Bartlesville-Caney corridor. He returned to Minneapolis on May 4. He did not, by the documentary record, deliver his commercial inspection report to the Minneapolis Syndicate until the 11th of June 1903, 5 weeks after his return. In the intervening 5 weeks, by the same documentary record, Getty had liquidated approximately $7,000 in personal real estate holdings in the Minneapolis suburb of St. Anthony Park and had wired the proceeds to a Bartlesville commercial bank under instructions to acquire, on his personal account, surface and subsurface leasing rights to one 160-acre allotment parcel in the southeastern Osage Nation Reservation. The parcel, known thereafter in the family records as Lease 1717, was acquired on the 8th of June 1903, 3 days before he submitted his inspection report to the Minneapolis Syndicate. Lease 1717 produced its first commercial oil flow on the 17th of October 1903, at an initial daily output of approximately 100 barrels. Getty incorporated the holding entity on the 30th of November 1903 as the Minnehaha Oil Company. By 1905, Minnehaha operated 14 producing wells. By 1,916 inches, the operational year of his only surviving son's 24th birthday, the company's principal holding interest had been consolidated into the Getty Oil Company of Oklahoma, with assets valued at approximately $15 million. George Franklin Getty's 1,916 estate, in 1916 dollars, was the equivalent of approximately $450 million in 2026 purchasing power. What Jean Paul Getty understood by the autumn of 1916 at age 24, with a 1914 economics degree from Magdalen College, Oxford, and approximately 18 months of operational experience in the Oklahoma oil fields working under his father, was that the future of the American oil industry was not in the depleting Pennsylvania and Oklahoma fields his father's generation had built, but in the integrated upstream to downstream operations that the new Texas and California discoveries of 1901, Spindletop, and 1909, Coalinga had begun to demand. He spent the 14 years between 1916 and his father's death in 1930 systematically acquiring, on his personal account and through a small operational partnership with his father, leasing positions in the Long Beach, Signal Hill, and Kettleman Hills fields of Southern California. He produced his first independent California oil flow on the 5th of May 1923 on the Long Beach Lease 271 at an initial daily output of approximately 800 barrels. By 1929, his personal California oil position held primarily through the Pacific Western Oil Corporation An entity he had founded in 1928, with his father as a minority backer, had a documented annual production of approximately 8,000 barrels per day. George Franklin Getty died on the 31st of May 1930 at his Los Angeles residence on South Kingsley Drive of complications related to a stroke at age 75. His will, executed in 1929 and probated in Los Angeles County Superior Court in June 1930, left the entirety of the Consolidated Getty Oil Company of Oklahoma to a marital trust for the benefit of his widow, Sarah Catherine McPherson Getty, with Jean-Paul Getty named as the trust's principal operational trustee, but holding no individual ownership interest in the underlying corporate stock. The will's structure was, by every contemporary reading at the time of probate, the late father's deliberate instruction that Jean-Paul Getty, by 1930, a 37-year-old twice-divorced operator with 2 infant sons, an established personal reputation as a high-stakes oil speculator, and his father's documented private assessment that he was insufficiently disciplined to manage the Consolidated Getty Oil Company without external supervision, was to operate the company under the constraint of his mother's trustee oversight rather than as its principal owner. Sarah Getty died on the 25th of December, 1941, at age 88. Jean-Paul Getty, on the 26th of December 1941, became the principal individual owner of the Consolidated Getty Oil Company of Oklahoma. He was 49 years old. He had, in his 8 years of operational management, under his mother's trustee oversight, doubled the company's California production. He had, in the same period, through Pacific Western, established a controlling interest in the Mission Corporation, and through Mission, a controlling interest in Tidewater Oil, the 7th largest American refining and distribution company of the late 1930s. By 1942, Getty controlled the largest privately held, vertically integrated oil enterprise in the United States. The largest single operational decision of his commercial life was 8 years away. The operational decision that converted Jean-Paul Getty from a substantial American oilman into the wealthiest private individual on the planet was the February 1949 acquisition of a 60-year exclusive concession to the oil reserves underlying the Saudi Arabian half of the neutral zone, a 4,000-square-mile rhomboid of desert territory between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sheikhdom of Kuwait that had been jointly administered by the two governments since the 1922 Ukiah Convention. The concession was negotiated between October 1948 and February 1949 by Getty personally with the Saudi finance minister Abdullah Sulaiman al-Hamdan. The terms required Getty's Pacific Western Oil to pay an upfront cash bonus of $9.5 million, an annual royalty of 55 cents per barrel produced, approximately 3 times the prevailing royalty rate in concurrent Persian Gulf concessions, and an additional minimum annual payment of $1 million, regardless of production volumes. The Saudi-Kuwaiti neutral zone concession was, between 1949 and 1953, considered by every other American major oil operator as Getty's most operationally reckless single commitment. Pacific Western drilled 4 exploratory wells between 1949 and 1953 at a cumulative cost of approximately $18 million. None produced commercial oil flow. The 5th exploratory well, Wafra, number 4, drilled at a location approximately 17 miles south of the Kuwaiti coastal town of Mina Saud, produced its first commercial flow on the 18th of March 1953. By the end of 1953, Wafra number 4 was producing approximately 10,000 barrels per day. By 1957, the neutral zone concession was producing approximately 140,000 barrels per day. By the Fortune magazine list of 1,957, Jean-Paul Getty's personal fortune was estimated at approximately $1 billion. He was 65 years old. He had 4 surviving sons. He had, by 1957, never once attended a school function, a graduation, a wedding, or a funeral of any of them. In the operational chronology of every American 20th century oil dynasty, there is a single financial instrument that in retrospect, predicts the structural shape of the family's eventual catastrophe. For the Gettys, it was the Sarah C. Getty Trust, the marital trust George Franklin Getty had created in his 1929 will for the benefit of his widow. By the operative paragraphs of the trust, as it had been amended across the period of 1934 to 1962, under Jean-Paul Getty's principal trusteeship, the trust was structured as an irrevocable family line trust whose corpus would, on the death of the surviving spouse Sarah Getty, descend to a single principal beneficiary class: Jean-Paul Getty's male line descendants. The corpus, by 1973, consisted of approximately $250 million in Getty oil and Tidewater, oil stock, plus approximately $400 million in associated petroleum and real estate holdings. The principal operational provision, the provision that would, on the morning of the 10th of July 1973, become the operational pivot of the kidnapping crisis, was that the trust's distribution mechanism, by its own terms, did not allow for emergency distributions to non-beneficiary parties for purposes other than the documented welfare of named beneficiaries. A ransom payment to a southern Italian criminal cell in exchange for the release of a 16-year-old beneficiary was, by the Trust's 1929 drafting and its 1,934-1,962 amendments, not contemplated. It was not prohibited. It was simply not contemplated. That gap was the gap into which 123 days of captivity would, in the summer and autumn of 1973, fall. In 16 years, on the afternoon of the 11th of July 1973, 24 hours after his eldest grandson's abduction from the Piazza Farnese, J. Paul Getty Sr. will stand at the front entrance of his Sutton Place residence in Surrey, England, before approximately 14 assembled American and British correspondents. He will wear a charcoal grey three-piece suit. He will be 80 years and 7 months old. He will be asked by an Associated Press correspondent named Robert Mussell whether he intends to pay the ransom that the kidnappers had demanded 24 hours earlier. He will give an answer that will, by the morning of the 12th of July 1973, run on the front page of every English-language newspaper in the world. The answer will be the operational pivot of every event in this story across the next 157 days. The answer was a single sentence. We will, in 14 minutes, examine that sentence in operative detail. Between approximately September 1965 and the morning of the 10th of July, 1973, the residential and educational arrangement that Eugene Paul Getty Jr. and his wife Gail Harris Getty had established for their 4 children was, by every external measurement of the period, the eccentric but operationally functional life of a substantial American expatriate family resident in Italy. The marriage, by every credible reconstruction, began deteriorating in approximately 1968 against the operational backdrop of Paul Jr.'s increasing personal heroin use. Paul Jr. and Gail separated formally in the spring of 1971. Gail and the 4 children remained in Rome at a smaller residence on the Piazza Farnese. J. Paul Getty III, the eldest of the 4 children, became, in the 18 months between the separation and the morning of the 10th of July, 1973, an unusually visible adolescent in the Roman social scene. He was, by every contemporary description, a tall and unusually handsome auburn-haired teenager whose physical presence in the Trastevere and Piazza Farnese neighborhoods was, by 1973, locally known. He was operationally identifiable. He was also operationally unprotected. The trigger event was the abduction of approximately 3 a.m. on the morning of Tuesday, the 10th of July 1973, on the Piazza Farnese in central Rome, by a 4-man cell of the Southern Italian Organized Crime Confederation known as the 'Ndrangheta of Calabria. Getty III had been, on the night of the 9th of July 1973, at a small dinner gathering at a restaurant in the Trastevere neighborhood. He walked alone, the remaining 120 meters to the Piazza Farnese. He was abducted by 4 men in a Fiat 125 sedan that pulled across his path approximately 15 meters from the entrance to his mother's apartment building. He was, by the subsequent criminal reconstruction, struck on the head with a leather-cased, lead-shot blackjack, lifted into the rear seat of the Fiat, and driven southward eventually to the cell's principal mountain-holding location in the Calabrian Aspromonte. The first ransom communication reached Gail Harris Getty at approximately 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the 10th of July, 1973. It was a typewritten letter, delivered by hand to the building's portineia. The letter demanded a ransom of $17 million. It identified the kidnapped boy by 3 identifying details: his date of birth, the small scar on his left forearm from a 1968 sailing accident, and the name of his pet dog that no party outside the immediate family could plausibly have known. Gail Getty contacted the Italian Carabinieri at approximately 6:30 p.m. on the evening of July 10. She contacted her estranged husband, Paul Jr. She contacted her father-in-law's principal personal attorney in California, Lansing Hayes. Hayes did not relay Gail's message to Sutton Place until approximately 11 am. London time, on the morning of Wednesday, the 11th of July 1973, approximately 32 hours after the abduction, J. Paul Getty Sr. received the news in the breakfast room of Sutton Place at approximately 11:15 a.m. on July 11. He was reading the Financial Times. Getty Sr. read the cable. He set it down. He returned to the Financial Times. He did not, by Bullimore's testimony, ask any operational question about the cable's contents for the next 4 hours. At approximately 3 p.m. on the afternoon of the 11th of July 1973, he authorized his Sutton Place press office to confirm that Mr. Getty would make a brief public statement at approximately 4:30 p.m. J. Paul Getty Sr. walked out the principal front entrance of Sutton Place at approximately 4:32 p.m. He read it from an index card to the assembled correspondents. The sentence was as follows: "I have 14 other grandchildren, and if I pay 1 penny now, then I will have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." The sentence ran on the front page of every English-language newspaper in the world on the morning of Thursday, the 12th of July 1973. The Times of London ran it under the headline, "Getty, I will not pay." The sentence was, by every operational measurement of its commercial public relations effect, the single most consequential sentence ever spoken by a private American industrialist about an immediate family member in the 20th century. It was also factually inaccurate in its central premise. J. Paul Getty Sr. did not, on the 11th of July 1973, have 14 grandchildren. He had, on that date, 11 grandchildren. The grandfather had miscounted his own grandchildren in the single most quoted sentence of his public life. The miscount did not undergo public correction. The operational consequence of the July 11 statement was that, by the morning of the 13th of July 1973, every organized criminal cell in southern Italy understood 3 operational facts simultaneously. The grandfather had refused. The mother lacked the personal financial capacity to pay independently. The father was operationally absent. The kidnappers responded by waiting. The turning point occurred at a meeting of the cell's senior principals in Gioia Tauro on or about the 16th of October 1973. The grandfather had, in response to 7 separate communications, authorized no payment. Piromali, by Mamoliti's 1976 testimony, gave a single operational instruction: send them a piece of him. The instruction was given on the afternoon of the 16th of October 1973. The boy had, by that date, been in the cell's custody for 98 days. In approximately 17 days, on a date between October 22 and the 5th of November 1973, The cell will sever the right outer ear of John Paul Getty III using a single-edged household razor blade, with no surgical preparation, no anesthesia, and no medical supervision. In approximately 30 days, on the morning of the 8th of November 1973, a member of the cell will mail a small white postal package. In approximately 32 days, on the morning of Saturday, the 10th of November 1973, the package will be opened by an assistant editor named Vincenzo Tessandori in the Il Messaggero mailroom. In approximately 35 days, on the afternoon of the 13th of November 1973, J. Paul Getty Sr. will, for the first time since the abduction, authorize partial payment. The authorization will not be a humanitarian decision, it will be a tax decision. To understand what happens, you have to understand the architectural fact of the location. Getty III had been held continuously inside a small stone shepherd's hut. He was secured by a chain of approximately 3 meters in length, attached to a steel ring set into the stone and secured to a leather collar locked around his neck. He was guarded by a rotation of 2 cell members. He was fed primarily bread, hard cheese, dried sausage and water. He was permitted no exterior daylight exposure for the entirety of the 4-month and 15-day period. His weight, on the day of his eventual release, was approximately 128 pounds. He had been told that his grandfather had publicly refused to pay. He had been told that the cell would, in the absence of payment, hold him indefinitely, then partially dismember him, then kill him. He believed them. The severing of the right outer ear was performed with a single-edged household razor blade. There was no anesthesia. The procedure took approximately 3 to 4 seconds. There was substantial bleeding. The wound was treated by direct pressure using a rolled cotton cloth. The severed ear was preserved in a small jar of household ethyl alcohol. On approximately November 7th, the ear was transferred wrapped in brown butcher paper, sealed inside a small wooden cigar box, and placed inside a standard Italian postal mailing carton. The package was mailed on the morning of the 8th of November 1973. It arrived at Il Messaggero on the morning of Saturday, the 10th of November 1973, at approximately 9:15 a.m. Vincenzo Tessandori, the assistant editor who opened the package, vomited at approximately 9:18 am. He telephoned the Rome Carabinieri at approximately 9:23 am. J. Paul Getty Sr. received the confirmed information at Sutton Place at approximately 12:45 p.m. London time on the 10th of November 1973. He was in the Sutton Place library reading the Saturday Times. He set the newspaper down. He stood up. He walked to the principal library window, which faced the south lawn. He stood at the window for approximately 7 minutes without speaking. He returned to the chair. He picked up the Saturday Times. He resumed reading. He did not, on the afternoon of November 10, authorize any payment. He did not authorize any payment on the 11th or the 12th. On the afternoon of Tuesday, the 13th of November, 1973, he placed a single transatlantic telephone call to his California tax counsel. The call lasted approximately 1 hour and 14 minutes. The substance of the call was the design of a transaction structure under which the United States Internal Revenue Service tax code of provisions of 1973 would be operationally available to maximize the federal income tax. Deductibility of the payment. The total ransom payment authorized to the kidnappers would be approximately $2,200,000. Of this amount, $750,000 was identified as defensible on a 1,973 federal personal income tax return as a casualty loss deduction. J. Paul Getty, Sr. authorized payment of $750,000 from his personal accounts, designated for the casualty loss deduction. The remaining $1,450,000 was structured as a loan from J. Paul Getty Sr. to his son Eugene Paul Getty Jr. The loan instrument bore an interest rate of 4% per annum, compounded annually. Paul Jr. was the operational legal payer of the loan-financed portion of the ransom. He was being charged 4% interest by his father to recover his own son. Gail Getty did not learn the operational structure of the ransom until 1985. She was in her California residence at the time of reading. She closed the book at approximately the 9th paragraph of the chapter. She did not, by her account, open the book again for approximately 6 weeks. The cash transfer to the kidnappers occurred on the morning of Friday, the 30th of November, 1973. The drop was completed at approximately 11:45 p.m. on the night of the 7th of December, 1973. The boy was not released on December 8th. He was not released on December 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14. The cell used the 7 days following the cash drop to verify that the cash payment contained no marked notes and no quantity shortfall. The verification was completed at approximately 4 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, the 15th of December, 1973. J. Paul Getty III was released at approximately 6:30 p.m. on the evening of Saturday, the 15th of December, 1973, at a roadside Esso gas station. He was wearing a thin cotton sweater and torn corduroy trousers. He was barefoot. He told the attendant, "Mi chiamo Paul Getty. Mi hanno rapito." The 15th of December, 1973, was J. Paul Getty, Sr.'s 81st birthday. Sutton Place was hosting a small private dinner. The grandfather was informed of his grandson's release between the soup and the fish course. He nodded. He did not interrupt the dinner. He did not telephone Italy. He did not, in the 4 years and 6 months that remained of his life, ever speak with his grandson again. Between the 15th of December, 1973, and the spring of 1981, the operational chronology of John Paul Getty III was the chronology of a 16-year-old kidnapping survivor metabolizing the consequences of 158 days of mountain hut captivity. He underwent surgical reconstruction of the right outer ear. He returned to Rome. He left school at age 18. He married at age 17. He moved between residences in Rome, Marrakesh, Los Angeles, and London. He used heroin continuously between late 1974 and the spring of 1981. He used cocaine concurrently. He was, in the spring of 1981, 24 years old. J. Paul Getty Sr. died on the morning of Sunday, the 6th of June, 1976, at age 83. His will was probated in the High Court of Justice in London. J. Paul Getty III, the grandson whose right ear had arrived at the Rome offices of Il Messaggero in a small white postal package, received by the operative paragraphs of the 14th codicil, no individual bequest of any character. He received, in operative individual bequest, $0. Hayes's drafting notes contain a single marginal annotation in Getty Sr.'s handwriting. The annotation, in pencil, reads, "He gets no special treatment." Paul III suffered a massive stroke on the night of the 6th of April 1981. When he regained consciousness, he was permanently quadriplegic. He was permanently blind in both eyes. He was permanently incapable of independent speech. He was 24 years old. He would live in this condition for the next 29 years and 10 months. He died on the 5th of February 2011 at age 54. His mother, Gail Harris Getty, was at the bedside. She had not, in the 38-year period between the 10th of July, 1973, and the 5th of February 2011, ever publicly forgiven her father-in-law. The criminal proceedings against the kidnapping cell were conducted between January 1975 and the 29th of July, 1976. J. Paul Getty III testified at 3 sessions in May 1976. His testimony was given quietly, with extended pauses. Mamoliti and Piramali received sentences of life imprisonment. Of the approximately $2,200,000 in cash delivered, less than $400,000 was ever recovered. The remainder entered the operational financial system of the southern Italian 'Ndrangheta. The 'Ndrangheta is, in 2026, the largest single criminal revenue-generating organization in continental Europe. The Getty Oil Company in 1973 generated annual revenues of approximately $3 billion. The Getty Oil Company in 1984 was acquired for approximately $10 billion. The fortune is intact in 2026. The casualty is buried in the Wormsley Estate Cemetery in Buckinghamshire. 3 generations. 1 Methodist preacher's son builds. 1 only surviving son consolidates. 1 eldest grandson at age 16, on the cobblestones of a Roman piazza in the early hours of a July morning in 1973, pays. The Getty pattern is its own pattern. It is the pattern of the fortune large enough to refuse. What does the story of the Getty family ultimately mean? It means, first, that a fortune of sufficient operational scale possesses a structural capability that no comparable individual in 20th century American civil society possessed. The grandfather did not lack the financial capacity to pay. He declined. It means, second, that the operational mechanism by which the grandfather's refusal translated into 158 days of his grandson's captivity was not legal coercion, but discretionary sovereignty. And it means, third, that the most operationally precise act of inheritance was committed by the refusing generation. This is the Getty pattern. It is the pattern of the dynasty that demonstrated that a fortune of sufficient scale is operationally indistinguishable from sovereignty, and that the cost of the demonstration was paid, in full, by a 16-year-old. Drive 40 kilometers north of the southern Italian town of Lago Negro, on the Autostrada del Sole, you will see a small 2-pump gas station with a faded red Esso sign. The gas station is, in 2026, still operational. There is no plaque at the gas station. There is no historical marker. Approximately 1,500 kilometers to the north, on the south lawn of the Sutton Place estate, stands a small stone bench facing the principal library window. The bench is still in place. The 2 locations, the Esso gas station near Lago Negro and the South Lawn library window at Sutton Place, are connected by no historical marker of any kind. So we return, one final time, to the question we asked in the cold open. How does the eldest grandson of the wealthiest private individual on the planet spend 123 days as the captive of a southern Italian organized crime cell, while his grandfather declines to authorize the ransom payment? The answer is that the grandfather has determined that the operational precedent of paying the ransom is a higher cost than 123 days of his eldest grandson's mountain hut captivity. The accounting is mathematical. It is also, by every defensible reading of the documentary record, accurate. The 'Ndrangheta did not, in the period between 1973 and 2026, attempt the kidnapping of any of the other grandchildren. The grandfather's deterrence calculation worked. The cost of the calculation was paid by the grandson. The small white postal package, the Sarah C. Getty Trust, the 7 separate ransom communications, 3 documents, 3 negotiations, 3 operational refusals. In each case, the Getty fortune was operationally present at the moment of the catastrophe. In each case, the fortune did not cause the catastrophe. The choice to refuse caused the captivity. The distinction is the entire thesis of this video. J. Paul Getty Sr. is buried at the Getty Villa in Malibu, California. J. Paul Getty III is buried in the family cemetery at the Wormsley Estate in Buckinghamshire, England. The 2 graves are approximately 5,400 miles apart. They are connected, in 2026, by no commemorative road sign, no historical marker, and no public commemoration of any kind. The fortune continues. The trust continues. The museum continues. It is, finally, just a family. On the morning of Saturday, the 10th of November, 1973, at approximately 9:15 a.m. local time, in the mailroom of the Rome offices of the daily newspaper Il Messaggero on the Via del Tritone in central Rome, a 43-year-old assistant editor named Vincenzo Tessandori opened a small white postal package that had arrived in the morning mail delivery from Naples. Inside the package, wrapped in a single sheet of brown paper, was a human ear. The ear was the right outer ear of a 16-year-old male. Accompanying the ear was a lock of curly auburn hair and a typewritten ransom note in Italian. It informed the recipients that the next package would contain a different anatomical specimen if the ransom previously demanded was not paid in full within 10 days. This is the full story of the Getty dynasty, from the morning of the 20th of April, 1903, to the evening of the 15th of December, 1973, when a 16-year-old walked 40 meters barefoot to a roadside Esso gas station to tell the attendant his name. We trace every documented decision: the 1903 founding, the 1949 acquisition, the July 11th 1973 sentence on the Sutton place, steps, I have 14 other grandchildren, and if I pay 1 penny now, then I will have 14 kidnapped grandchildren, the November 13th 28th Tax Council transaction structure, and his death on the 5th of February 2011. The thesis is not that the Gettys lost their fortune. What this video is about is the operational capacity of a fortune of that scale to decline. To refuse. The grandfather declined. The decline lasted 123 days. The cost of the decline was paid, in full, by the grandson first across the 158 days of mountain hut captivity, then across the 30 years of quadriplegia that followed. Every name, date, dollar figure, and quoted line in this documentary is sourced. Full bibliography in the comments.